Hey there everyone, I'm Mr. Grace and this is Horror 101. Welcome to class. For context, I am legitimately a teacher, 12th grade English language arts, though I also have a bachelor's degree in film and video production and have worked in and out of the entertainment industry in various production positions for the better part of the last 20 years, so I'm actually quite qualified for this. Just to be crystal clear, this is not my attempt to suddenly have a career as a teacher turned YouTuber. Not what my goal is. I will leave that to more qualified professionals. Now that we have that out of the way, let's get started. The inspiration for this actually came from a combination of sources all colliding at once. A few students toward the end of last school year expressed an interest in retro games. They knew I loved horror and the Resident Evil series, so I dug out my original PlayStation, the first two games in the series, and an old-ass CRT monitor to let them experience the games the way I got to play them when I was a teenager and they had just been released. Another student also loves horror films, and nearly daily we'd have conversations about our favorites during lunch. She's like a mini-me that way, and if she chooses to pursue filmmaking, she's going to create some thought-provoking, original stories. I also watch a lot of video essays on YouTube when grading papers and such. A lot of channels such as That Chapter, Tyrone Magnus, The Spear Hunter, Ink Ribbon, Altiori, Professor of Rock, Auburn Preach, Norman Chan and Adam Savage with Tested, Zepla, and a handful of others. Yes, my tastes are all over the place, but I love their content and the format, and the fact that their personalities and their passion for what they're talking about come out. March of 2024 also happened to be the 20th anniversary of my graduating film school, and I got a little nostalgic re-uploading the short documentary I did for a class called 6 Feet Underappreciated. So, zombies have been on my mind recently. Last year, my kid made an impressive documentary for school about the impact of the Stonewall riots. I'm super proud of what they made, and it was very inspired. A couple of conversations and encouragement from my wife to seal the deal, and, well, the lesson plan started to form. So sit back and enjoy. I'm about to drop some knowledge on you about the history of the zombie genre, and how we went from sleepwalkers and voodoo to cannibalistic corpses and military experiments gone wrong. Let's start with a question. What comes to mind when we hear the word zombies? Shuffling corpses, graveyards in the dark, foggy night, a rather awesome song from the early 1990s that has nothing to do with zombies, even though radio stations will play it every October ad nauseum. If it wasn't for filmmaker George A. Romero releasing the film Night of the Living Dead and the inspiration that he brought to horror films, these images and thoughts may never have been. A proper exploration of this film, its creator, and the impacts of their works are necessary at this point. So strap in for a long one. Before Romero's now classic in 1968, zombies had appeared in films, but in some different forms. Now, in preparing for this video, I of course did what all academics do, and I researched the bejesus out of everything. I came to discover, the writing of this project in early 2024, there were 1,800 known films involving zombies. Yeah, I'm not going to talk about all of those. So let's focus on a few highlights before getting into Romero's films properly. The earliest film in which we saw a zombie was in the form of Caesar the Sleepwalker in the German silent film The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, directed by Robert Wein back in 1920, in which a zombie was portrayed as something as simple as a man hypnotized. We also saw zombies in films such as White Zombie in 1934, the films Revolt of the Zombies, Uwanga, and The Walking Dead, not that Walking Dead, all in 36, and I Walked with a Zombie from 1943. In many of these films, they portrayed zombies as they were originally thought to be, the products of Haitian voodoo practices. Romero changed all that with the release of a single film, a film which revolutionized the subgenre of horror films known as zombie movies. George A. Romero's feature film debut, co-written by John Russo and released in 1968, Night of the Living Dead. Should be pointed out that Romero himself has stated that even in the script for Night, the shambling corpses were never called zombies, but instead referred to as ghouls, which is a bit closer to a title to what they appeared as, given the word ghoul was a term to describe creatures lurking in graveyards to feast on the dead bodies in pre-Islamic Arabian folklore. Along with an aesthetic style inspired by many great horror directors before him, Romero reinvented the notion of what a zombie was. He created the imagery of them as cannibalistic corpses, able to create others through biting them, going through whatever obstacles and attempts to pacify their never-ending hunger for flesh. Some of these ideas never came about on screen until Romero's film. They had, however, been shown in the EC Comics publications, Tales from the Crypt, The Vault of Horror, and The Haunt of Fear, published between 1949 and 1954. Many of these issues were later adapted into episodes for the TV series Tales from the Crypt, which aired from 1989 to 1996, and featured a very unique undead host.
Good evening, creeps, and welcome aboard Tales from the Crypt Scare Lines Flight 666, offering direct service from your living room straight to hell.
Remember, this was decades before the comic book form would be respected and elevated to include titles like The Walking Dead or Marvel Zombies. Zombies in these early comics did still adhere to many of the superstitious voodoo beliefs, but they inspired Romero through the fact that the creatures in the comics were unstoppable, at least in the sense that they overcame adversities to achieve their goal. Oftentimes, they were acting out the consequences of a curse or getting revenge on a damned soul as a victim from the grave. George Romero changed that, giving a more primal drive to the undead. Night of the Living Dead would unknowingly become the first film in what would later become an entire series spread over installments spanning decades. In the first film, the reason behind the zombie's existence is never truly revealed. This plays to the old notion of fear. Which is more frightening? The creature lurking in the dark, or the thought of a creature lurking? Fear of what we don't know and what we don't understand is far more powerful than the fear of what we're shown. And Romero even makes fun of this with his characters with his witty, dark sense of humor. They refuse to believe in the unbelievable, that the dead are returning to life. They opt instead for the scientific approach, trying to rationalize what is happening so that they can feel safer in knowing. The film also set a style for Romero as a filmmaker. He tends to use space to tell the story, and many times the actor starts deep in the background only to run into the camera to end with a close-up, or begin with a medium shot of the actor running down a road, only to dolly with them, showing the space as they travel through it. Perhaps the most inventive shot in the film, to me, is that of a single zombie taking a hit to the face. The zombie reels back from this, setting up a shot that reveals several more zombies in frame. Lighting also comes into play, of course. Romero goes to films by such horror masters as Alfred Hitchcock and Frank Castle in terms of how to use lighting to amplify what he's wanting to tell. Many feel that the cemetery scene with the lightning strikes is Romero's attempt at throwing in some Hitchcock inspiration. I prefer to think that the reveal of the half-eaten skull toward the beginning of Act 2 is a Hitchcock moment. It shows that suspense and horror are created through what you don't see. The skull being mostly hidden in shadow, plus the bonus of being shot in black and white, creates a sense of unease and revulsion. I think one of my best friends, Alex, stated it very well 20 years ago in 6 Feet Underappreciated.
The lighting on it, it's really sets the mood because since it's in black and white, you really get the feel that shit's going down because there's a dark mood about it.
Perhaps the most horrifying aspect of the zombie film is not even the zombies, but the persons trapped in the situation. Some refuse to accept what's happening and try to rationalize what's going on, while others snap and show the first signs of going insane, their minds unable to process what is happening. Others struggle for control, using it as a safety blanket of sorts. Most of the characters argue more than get anything accomplished, and this just further worsens their situation. It's this display of the human psychological condition during an extreme situation that is the most frightening, more so than the shambling corpses outside the doors and the windows. In the 1978 sequel, Dawn of the Dead, an older and wiser George Romero further developed his skills and hidden metaphors. While filmed in color this time around, the lighting in some scenes still has a similar effect, if not a more artificial one. However, the story he chose to tell continues his exploration of human psychology. In this film, a group of people find a shopping mall that's relatively abandoned. They take it upon themselves to hole up in the mall until the situation begins to calm and go away. Oh, how wrong they are. The mall is another form of false security. In fact, it is in many ways a trap they have created for themselves. Isolated from the outside world, they lose sense of what exactly is out there waiting for them. The zombies and the carnage they bring, not the world they once knew. Another new element is that Romero decided to throw in a semi-explanation as to the cause of the zombies. First explaining that they are still us. They still hold small memories of their everyday lives. Then, actor Ken Foree delivers a line that became famous.
When there's no more room in hell, the dead will walk the earth.
This was Romero's only real attempt to explain where the zombies came from. After this, he went back to the unknown explanation. Romero also took the opportunity at this stage to further show that zombies were the walking dead. Dead being the operative word. By teaming up with makeup effects artist Tom Savini, he was able to better show that the zombies weren't all there. Physically, that is. Prosthetic appliances combined with an overall coat of gray paint helped to create the sense of decay and disease among the undead. He was also able to be more creative in terms of dispatching the zombies, better to show parts being shot or cut off. It was a far leap from the cutaway and cast and shadow approaches in Night a decade earlier. In 1985, Romero finished the Dead trilogy, as it was known for many years, with the film Day of the Dead. In this installment, a small group of military personnel and scientists take shelter in an underground facility and perform experiments on the undead persons that are roaming the land in an attempt to further understand the threat that they're facing. This film shows the darker side of people being confined together. Groups in charge begin to abuse their position of power and intimidate those below them. While the group in Dawn tended to have common goals and agendas, the group in Day seemed to be at odds with each other. Add to this the fact that they still don't know what exactly the zombies are, and that makes this situation that much more frightening. What if the only people in the world to deal with the zombie threat could never solve the zombie problem? It would essentially be the end of the world as we know it, wouldn't it? We're also introduced in this film to the MVP of zombies, Bub. Romero started to further explore a concept he mentioned in the previous film. What if zombies not only retained some sense of who they were before turning, but could also develop independent thought and rationale? We see this in the relationship with Bub and Dr. Matthew Logan, played by actors Sherman Howard and Richard Liberty respectively. Because of exploring and experimenting with this notion, we see Bub go as far during the third act madness as to seek justice after the death of Dr. Logan, showing that there was indeed an emotional connection that formed between the undead and the living. Romero's filmmaking technique didn't change much since his days filming Dawn. However, the makeup effects done by Savini improved. The zombies were no longer simply painted gray with few prosthetics. In fact, it seemed to become the opposite. Most faces were mask or prosthetic attachments, with only the background extras being painted without strict attention to detail. Adding to this, Savini began to add animatronic and puppet effects, and the possibilities opened up for Romero yet again. And man, were those possibilities bloody. Around the times of the release of Day and Dawn of the Dead, the world began to see other zombie films that were obviously inspired by the rules that Romero had established. Such films included Lucio Fulci's Zombie 2 in 1979, and the popular Return of the Living Dead series that lived from 1986 to 2005. Pun intended. The first film in the Return series, directed by Dan O'Bannon, was even based on an early script written by co-writer on Night of the Living Dead, John Russo. The Return series tried to take what Romero established and elaborate on it even more, making brains the focus of zombies. The series even went as far as to have zombies be able to utter simple words, and it was the first time that this style of zombie actually rose from the grave. Also, the Return series was the first in the zombie genre that tried to establish an understandable reason for what created zombies. It's told in these films that the zombies are the dead reanimated due to a chemical spill of top-secret radioactive government materials called trioxin. We were also introduced to another fan-favorite undead, the Tar Man.
Who's there?
While this accidental leak scenario worked in the first films, the sequels began to focus more on the government knowing what trioxin did and experimenting on corpses with it, trying to weaponize it and create a super army of sorts. Beyond the means of creating zombies, These films also provided a reason for their specific insatiable appetite, a concept that's rather profoundly tragic and terrifying when you stop and think about it.
Why do you eat people?
Not people. Brains.
Why?
The pain.
What about the pain?
The pain of being dead. I can feel myself rot.
During the editing of this video, it was announced that we would be getting a new Return of the Living Dead film, Christmas of 2025. Another Romero-inspired piece of work from the 1980s that everyone is familiar with is the music video for Michael Jackson's Thriller in 1983, directed by horror icon John Landis and with special makeup effects by the legendary Rick Baker. Having fun with this and leaning further into the campiness of the genre, the Return series soon after included a Michael Jackson zombie in The Return of the Living Dead Part 2 in 1988. Many more Romero-esque moments have followed since then, one of the most beloved of which is a vignette in the Treehouse of Horrors 3 episode of The Simpsons, Dial Z for Zombie in 1992. While this too takes inspiration from the Return series, it all goes back to what Romero started. The story combines magic and flesh-eating, perfectly blending all of the tropes of the zombie genre at that time together seamlessly. And even pays homage to one of Romero's sources of inspiration by playing off the title of the Alfred Hitchcock film Dial M for Murder from 1954. This particular episode also has one of my all-time favorite moments of The Simpsons.
Hey, Simpson, I'm feeling a mite peckish. Mind if I chew your ear?
Dad, you killed the zombie Flanders.
You was a zombie?
Among many successful products to have been inspired by Romero's approach is the Capcom video game series Resident Evil, known in Japan as Biohazard, first released on the Sony PlayStation in 1996. I've mentioned before some YouTube channels that I'm a fan of that do the Resident Evil series and its community justice. Please definitely take time to check out their content. If you're a fan of the series, then you're either already a subscriber of theirs, or you soon will be. The first game in the series places a group of officers similar to a SWAT team called STARS, or Special Tactics and Rescue Services, in a strange, isolated mansion where zombies and other monstrosities lurk. Many of the cinematic moments, both in the original 1996 game and the 2002 Nintendo remake, which is the same as the Resident Evil HD remaster on modern consoles, take direct inspiration from Romero's style and films. The games also take inspiration from the Return series by trying to use a means of science to explain the cause of the problem. In these games, a bioengineered virus called the T-virus is created by a major pharmaceutical corporation that also works secretly making bioweapons. The source of the zombie outbreak is just that, an outbreak. The virus is spread through the same means, one zombie turning another person into a zombie through a single bite. However, if a person is bitten, there is an antivirus that can be administered within a certain amount of time. This was far from anything any of the previous series involving zombies ever did, and was unique to the world of Resident Evil for a time. The world of Resident Evil has expanded over the years into other mediums, including CG films, live action, comics, manga, board games, figures, and a wonderful novel series written by S.D. Perry. A fun fact, Romero himself directed the Japanese commercials for the promotion of Biohazard 2 in 1997, featuring actors Brad Renfro and Adrienne France as characters Leon S. Kennedy and Claire Redfield, respectively. Romero was also one of a handful of filmmakers who wrote a script for a live-action Resident Evil film long before the Paul W.S. Anderson film would release in 2002. That script, and what could have been had Romero's film been made, has even been the recent subject of a documentary released January 2025. A PDF version of the script can be found in the link in the description below. Please enjoy it. Much like there have been many films involving zombies before and after Romero's influence, so too have there been books and novels. For the purposes of horror fiction, we for sure can trace such works back to Mary Shelley's Frankenstein in 1818 and H.P. Lovecraft's Herbert West Reanimator in 1921, which was also adapted into the film Reanimator in 1985, directed by Stuart Gordon. We also have The Magic Island in 1929, written by William Seabrook, which is actually an account of the author's travels in Haiti and some of the events that he witnessed. For zombies more befitting the influence of Romero, we have works like the Illuminatus trilogy by Robert Shea and Robert Anton Wilson from 1976. This one is weird, but is definitely worth the read once you reach a sequence at a festival. In 2004, Brian Keene wrote The Rising, about other dimensional beings that have watched and hated us for millennia. They find a way to enter our world by taking over the bodies of the dead. They do eat their victims, but leave enough so that their sibling can inhabit the body and still be able to move. Of course, they do get carried away sometimes. However, these zombies retain all of the memories of their host and are quite capable of speech. They're not the slow-moving, shambling fools often depicted. They are cunning and intelligent, and that is a frightening proposition for a zombie to be capable of. Another book by Keene I'd recommend is Dead Sea from 2007. This book takes a more traditional approach to the Romero-esque zombie type. The majority of the book takes place in an oil rig in the ocean, which seems like an ideal location for survival. Until it isn't. Best of all, especially looking at it as an educator, is that there are now so many books out there written for young adults. Among those worth checking out would be the Rotten Ruin series by Jonathan Mayberry, the first book of which was published in 2004. Also, The Forest of Hands and Teeth by Carrie Ryan from 2009, and the series of sequel books that followed. And an interesting last suggestion would be Zombie by Darren Shan, started in 2012. These books are about a teenager named B. Smith who walks us through a first-person account of what it's like being a teenager in a world filled with the undead. But it also explores complex themes like racism, xenophobia, and the we versus them mentality, all from a teen perspective. There's a twist to this tale, but I'll leave that for you to discover on your own. For the little ones, there's also the Zombie Chaser series by John Klopfer, the first book of which was published in 2010. There are many, many other works out there if you do a quick Google search, so any fan is sure to find something to whet their literary appetite. These are just a select few I chose to highlight to get you started. It didn't take long for the original films to be looked at for remakes and reimaginings. Night of the Living Dead was remade in 1990, this time directed by Tom Savini. The overall story is pretty much identical to the original. There are slight changes in the exact actions of the characters, and the ending is quite different from the original version. Savini did a wonderful job, both honoring the original source material while at the same time making his version something that still felt unique and fresh. Plus, any film featuring the amazing late Tony Todd is going to be a win in my book.
I saw one of those things take 30 hits and keep on coming. The damn thing had to be dead, but it kept on coming. Till it took a hit in the head. That brought it down. The only way to stop him, you gotta get him in the head.
In 2004, we were given a reimagining of Dawn of the Dead, directed by Zack Snyder, who has gone on to produce and direct some noteworthy films, including another zombie film for Netflix, Army of the Dead in 2021. His version of Dawn of the Dead strays further from its predecessor, and also adds new dimension to what the zombies are and what they're capable of. The story still focuses on a group of survivors that hole up in a mall, but they're more forced into that condition rather than having planned it out. Rather than the zombie problem be something that has been going on for a short time and causing people to come together, this time it happens relatively overnight. Another change made to the zombies is that they are fast. I mean really fast. These mothers are able to sprint after you this time around. This upped the ante on what made the zombies frightening. Now, not only was there the risk of them tearing you to pieces, but you could no longer trot past them. This was a stroke of genius and a curse at the same time. Also, for some unexplained reason, the zombies seem to hunger only for human flesh. There's a dog running around in the film that the zombies take no real notice in.
See? Look, he's walking right by them. I mean, they're not even paying attention to him.
Straying even further from the original source material is the 2008 version of Day of the Dead. There are many callbacks to the original to be found, and a direct connection to Snyder's Dawn of the Dead with actor Ving Rhames, and the film definitely takes cues from that style of zombie. But that's as far as the connections go. It is very much a self-contained narrative where the origins of the zombie virus and how it was unleashed are told to us. The film did not receive the best reviews when it was released, and time hasn't been very kind to it. But it is a fun film to just toss into the background for a quick zombie fix without needing to do any sort of deep thinking. There's some irony in that. In 2005, Romero made a much celebrated return to continue his world building in the film Land of the Dead. We see what the world has become and rebuilt into decades after the start of the zombie apocalypse. Continuing with using his films to deliver metaphors for current social situations, Romero shows us the flaws of a class system and the consequences the false sense of security they create has for certain groups. We also see a further evolution to the zombies, hinting that there's a means of communication and power dynamics shown through how the zombie Big Daddy gathers and guides other undead. Plus, John Leguizamo, automatic win. Romero's follow-up film in 2007, Diary of the Dead, is perhaps his biggest departure from the Dead films that came before. In this film, we see a soft reboot rather than continue the story thread created by its predecessors. It is also a huge departure in filmmaking style and methods. Going back to the roots of a zombie outbreak and showing how the story unfolds from the onset, Romero chose to present this film as a contemporary found footage type, allowing him to also explore emerging media. This project allowed him to tackle those themes while getting back in touch with his low-budget roots. At the time of its release, there were some unfair comparisons to found footage and zombie films released around the same time, such as The Zombie Diaries in 2006, Wreck in 2007, and its US version Quarantine in 2008 alongside Cloverfield that same year. But it needs to be acknowledged that Romero initially had the idea come to mind as far back as 1999, shortly after the release of the Blair Witch Project. A sequence from Diary included the group of filmmakers having an encounter with a group of National Guards. This same AWOL group would be the focus of Survival of the Dead in 2009. Romero would return to his more traditional film style for this installment, which uses the zombie infestation as a means to explore the concepts of war and conflict, and how we as humans would rather fight and be right than compromise and work together. The film is also super ridiculous with its humor, and I absolutely love it. You can tell that Romero was having a blast on the project at every level. Unfortunately, Survival would be Romero's last zombie film before his passing in 2017. Before that heartbreaking event, he had written a treatment for a script titled Twilight of the Dead, which would conclude his original narrative that was left off at the end of Land of the Dead. As of the filming of this, the film is said to be in pre-production under the supervision of Suzanne Romero, with the script being worked on by Paolo Zalotti, Joe Netter, and Robert Lucas, with Brad Anderson attached as director. For the record, I need to personally state that I don't consider 28 Days Later from 2002 to be a zombie movie. They aren't dead, just effing pissed. They're only infected with the virus.
Infected with what?
Rage.
That would be like saying that the infected persons in The Crazies or the games in the show The Last of Us are zombies when they very much are not. Even the star of the film himself, Cillian Murphy, has stated in multiple interviews he doesn't consider it to be a zombie film. There are aspects of a zombie film present that absolutely cannot be denied, and there are certainly references to the genre. Please feel free to see it differently for yourself. There is nothing wrong with seeing this as a zombie film, depending purely on how strict you are with your definition of what a zombie is. But for me, not a zombie movie. We'll see if the upcoming 28 years later does anything to change that opinion. Other works inspired by what Romero started worth mentioning would be comic books directly inspired by his films. Night of the Living Dead and Dawn of the Dead have both been adapted in comic book form several times, and there's a mini-series titled Night of the Living Dead, Barbara's Zombie Chronicles, based off of the remake of the film rather than the original. Death Troopers, written by Joe Schreiber and published in 2009, combines the world of Star Wars with the undead. There's the Robert Kirkman created comic book series The Walking Dead, which started in 2004, and the popular AMC series of the same title that first aired in 2010 with an amazing pilot directed by legend Frank Darabont, along with multiple spin-offs. On the video game side, we have many entries. Publisher Valve released Left 4 Dead in 2008 and its sequel in 2009, both games taking heavy inspiration from Snyder's Dawn of the Dead. Left 4 Dead also got a comic book treatment in 2010 with the Left 4 Dead: The Sacrifice. Before that series, we had Stubbs the Zombie in Rebel Without a Pulse in 2005 by Wide Load Games, which I vehemently encourage you to give a try. And we were given the brilliant Dead Rising in 2006 by Capcom. We've seen both comic and the adapted TV series for iZombie, comics first published in 2010, and the series airing in 2014. There's the book Warm Bodies, published in 2011, with the feature film released in 2013, and an interesting take on the classic, with Pride and Prejudice and Zombies, published in 2009 and adapted for film in 2016. We saw a children's movie with Paranorman in 2012, and far too many others to mention, without this already long lecture being that much longer. But there is one more that I want to highlight, the semi-parody Shaun of the Dead that was released in 2004. While many people thought this European take on the zombie genre was going to be a comedy with zombies in it, it came out quite the opposite. It is a zombie film with comedy. There are even many moments within the film that go back to moments directly from some of Romero's trilogy. It's an amazing film with witty and intelligent writing, wonderful humor, and some sweet special effects. I highly recommend giving it a watch if you haven't already. If you're a fan of the genre, you will not be disappointed. For a few last-second mentions, I would recommend checking out Zombieland from 2009, Cockneys vs. Zombies from 2012, Cooties from 2014, and Unhuman from 2022, the last of which being really fun and having a great twist toward the end. Through the changes made, George A. Romero established a new way we perceive zombies in media and popular culture. No longer are they just the product of voodoo witchcraft or hypnosis. They are the undead, corpses reanimated whose only goal in unlife is to feed off the flesh of the living. Whether they're the product of biowarfare experiments, can utter the word brains, or can sprint after you as you speed off in a car, it all goes back to how George Romero reinvented the genre and in many ways opened the doors for filmmakers that followed in his stead. If you liked anything in particular in this video, or if you have suggestions for possible future topics should I decide to do more of these, I would love to hear about them in the comments below. I hope you all enjoyed this rant of mine, and thank you for sticking through with me to the end. Class dismissed.